I'm just thinking, here I am trying to put super glue on my nose, and all of a sudden, honey,
Operator, can you give me the ER?
can you come help me? So welcome back, everyone, to the podcast. I am John. So good to have you join us. And I'm here, of course, with our good friends, Tom and Brad. Tom, how you doing this morning?
Yeah, that's Tom. Get her done. Get her done.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, and I'm doing well. I'm doing well.
You know, before I was trying to have thoughtful, meaningful connection, but Tom said, "No, start. It's time. They got to give the people what they want." That's what he said.
Yeah.
And they want more of us.
Well, yeah. and for all of those who don't have any idea of what we do before we start the hello, this was one of those moments where I was thinking of you all and saying, "Hey, this is good stuff. Stop. Let's get started." So,
yeah, very good. Thank you, Tom. On behalf of all the people, thank you.
Mi gente.
Brad, what's going down there?
Are we live? Have we started yet? Okay. Oh man, I'm just hanging in there, you know.
Are we yet alive?
Are we yet alive?
And are we yet live? That should be the update to that hymn,
there
right?
You go, right? And rolling in film today. That's right.
And are any of us going to be robbed today? Live.
Right. Oh, so that happened last week, and I saw that story right before I got on the Zoom, and I wanted to bring it up. I didn't know how we would, get to it or not, but that was.
I missed the story. What?
Brad hadn't heard about it at all. Tom, you tell him. You tell him.
Well, no, I'm not going to tell him because yesterday, John is going on and on. First of all, he goes, well, we weren't surprised that a pastor got robbed. We weren't surprised that a pastor got robbed in church. We weren't surprised by a pastor got robbed in church live on Facebook. And I'm going, yeah, we are. Every time he said something, I go, I have no idea what you're talking about.
Yeah.
And then I asked Ellen, my wife, on the way home. She goes, I said, had you heard about that? And she says, yeah, of course. It's all over Facebook. And I didn't know anything about it. So, but you actually saw the story. I just heard it from you. So let's go back to you, John.
Yeah, tell the story.
Brooklyn pastor, I actually think he fashions himself as a bishop, was preaching, and it was being broadcast live. And as he's preaching, I think 2 or 3 masked men come in and rob him and his wife, which is crazy, right? And thankfully, everybody's okay. But I talked about this in yesterday's sermon, because it went in perfectly with that story, parable of the rich fool. The men who robbed the pastor and his wife took over $1 million worth of jewelry from them. Yes, exactly, Brad, exactly.
Yeah, and
exactly.
From what I understand, if I understood you correctly yesterday, although you didn't say it this way, but it didn't. When you first heard it was like $500,000. You really just can't. But when it hit the million mark, that's when you go, wow, that's amazing.
Yeah, that was a dumb
lottery
joke,
ticket thing, or what?
Yeah.
I don't understand. How $1 million for the jewelry?
I mean, this is what he wears, and it's his lifestyle, and so it's that kind of prosperity. And there's a lot more to actually the story if you go digging around. And obviously they were targeted. Nobody else was robbed. So there's even an idea that this is an inside job that he set this up. I don't want to get into. I don't know, but I just use it as an example. We read the parable of the rich fool. Jesus,
the battle of building bigger and better barns,
right? And and then because the rich fool says, to himself, "Look at all my stuff. What am I going to do?" I read some comments from the pastor who has had to defend himself. I'm sure probably not for the first time, about his lavish lifestyle. And I kid you not, Brad. He says, "I mean, this is my money. This is what I want to do with it. If I make my money, if I want to spend it this way, I'm going to spend it this way." I thought, wow, that is exactly what the rich fool saying. And so now I do want to tell everybody who hasn't heard that sermon, I wasn't just saying, oh, look at this guy. That's horrible. My point was that we look at that. It's too easy to look at a sort of extreme example like that and say, "No, that's not right." What we need to figure out is like we say our own kind of thing like that too, right?
Yeah.
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 Well, I was going to say on point, Ellen and I had a conversation on the way home because, and it started with, so how long do you think this car will last, that it'll be, because we're talking about getting a new car, and really it's more Tom is talking about getting a new car. And
a new Bentley? A new Bentley? Is that what you're looking
No.
There's nothing wrong with the old one, John.
That's
Yeah.
That's right.
It's not the Bentley we're replacing.
Just wash it once
It's
in a
the
while. It'll be
Cadillac.
fine.
We're replacing the Cadillac.
Yeah, the old Cadillac, crummy
Old
Cadillac.
Cadillac, right. Mhm.
Well, but you know, it was a conversation that we had, and we weren't thinking about how can a pastor have that much money, much jewelry on him as he's preaching. That wasn't. It was, yeah. Sometimes I'm saying the same thing that he's saying about his wealth, his riches. I'm doing that with my own.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, very good. And I did tell the congregation, Brad, I said, this is the only jewelry I wear. So I don't know what my wife's got on back there. Everybody's robbing up. They're getting it off from her. So this is all. I don't even wear a watch, man. Look, I don't even wear watches.
Yeah,
So.
yeah.
Anyway, all right, let's carry on. I got a story for you. Be careful, Tom. Be careful.
Yeah.
Just finger there. Watch it.
At least 2 went up, so I was safe no matter what.
All right. So speaking of watching videos online, you guys do any kind of DIY projects around the house? You big
All the time.
DIYers?
Yeah, all the time.
I'm trying to think of. I did do a DIY. Do it.
DIY.
Yeah, DIY.
Do yourself in?
Yeah.
What?
I did get a DUI. I did watch a DUI. Oh no.
No, right. That's right.
Okay.
I remember a billboard in the Dallas area for like I don't remember, I think I think it was air conditioner or electrician. When DIY becomes OMG.
Yeah,
all
right.
us.
Right.
When your
I've seen that
husband's
too.
Usually
DIY.
plumbing when that
Yeah.
happens because it's flooding everywhere. Yeah, right.
So do you guys get on YouTube to do with DIY stuff?
Yeah, when I get stumped on something, yeah, I'll Google stuff and try to figure out, okay, what the heck,
So
how do you fix this?
I'm a big fan of Brady Shearer. I don't know if you know him. He's a sort of social media kind of guru, right? The church social media.
Mhm.
And I find his material to be very thoughtful and very sort of like where we are. Like, in other
Mhm.
words, if you're going to do social media ministry, do it right?
Yeah.
And one of the many things he talks about is that a lot of us don't understand is YouTube is a search engine, right? People
Mhm.
go to YouTube to search for whatever. So as a church, right? Take advantage of that. People want to know, how do I read the Bible, right? What does it mean to be a Christian? Use your videos instead of broadcasting your old worship services, instead of doing that, what if you made a video that walks somebody through how to read the Bible, right? So anyway, YouTube is a great place for DIY.
DI.
Yes,
Yeah.
DIY. I did say it
DIY.
right. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, as many times as I've gone to Facebook for DIY, I have never gone to YouTube to try to pull off a rhinoplasty surgery.
DIY rhinoplasty?
So there's a man in Brazil who told doctors at the nose, throat, and ears department that he got an idea to do his own rhinoplasty nose surgery from YouTube, and that he used rubbing alcohol to disinfect the area and veterinary anesthetic to numb the pain. And after he was done, quote unquote, operating, he used self-absorbing thread and super glue to close the wound. So imagine yourself, wonder what I could do about this thing. I'm sure YouTube can help me.
Who's the idiot that did the YouTube originally,
So
Yeah.
apparently this is actually a thing.
Oh my
It's
gosh.
shining. I'm reading a line from this article, that's all. it is now shining a spotlight on the so-called home rhinoplasty videos that allegedly teach people how to make their noses smaller or thinner. So apparently this is a thing, at least in Brazil or some other places.
Ay, vey.
Now I
Yeah,
keep super glue and
Americans wouldn't do that.
No, no, of course not.
we use Gorilla Glue.
That's exactly right. Duct tape, man. We don't use
Yeah.
that.
That's
dissolve
right.
Americans use their noses to push peanuts up,
That's
up
right.
mountains.
Right.
You know,
Why in the world would we blow that scene?
And I'm telling you.
But
make
Tom,
it
apparently
smaller,
you've
it
never
makes it
done
just
that.
much harder.
I mean, you've never actually done it, so you don't know how hard that could be. What if you get in there and you do some damage? I mean, you don't want to spend money on go to the doctor or whatever. You just fix it yourself.
Yeah,
Super glue.
You know, the nose is one of those places, I guess, in your forehead, in your head, that is has the most blood vessels.
Mhm.
You know, and I mean that's why we get nosebleeds all the time. You know, it's why your nose is so susceptible to bleeding at high altitudes and dry climates and what have you. Is that there's just so little. Can you imagine if somebody bled to death trying to do their own nose? I'm going, dude, really?
I'm just, as a kid, I remember those super glue commercials where the man with the hard hat was hanging on from the thing. I'm just thinking, here I am trying to put super glue on my nose, and all of a sudden, honey,
Operator, can you give me the ER?
can you come help me?
Or worse, get one of them stuck closed.
Oh
Oh,
man.
my gosh.
Yes, of all the things you need to DIY, let's be
Mm.
careful with trying to do your own nose surgeries. Even DIY church, let's be careful, but even DIY church, but don't DIY nose surgery.
No,
please.
no,
Okay.
no.
All right. I just want to put that out there in case that started becoming a thing. So, all right. So here's what we really want to talk about today. And we got plenty of time. So I'm going to read the article's headline, and we'll go from there. It says, with Gen Z, everybody knows who Gen Z is,
Mhm.
right? These
It's one
are
of them pop stars, isn't it? No, I'm just kidding.
What year do they start Gen Z?
I think it's about 2000-ish, right?
Yeah.
As far as I understand, the oldest Gen Zs are around 40-ish. But usually
that doesn't jive then.
Okay, because millennials are so Gen Z is older. Gen
I'm
Z.
sorry, excuse me.
Older.
I said Gen Z. Oldest millennials are 40.
Right.
So,
Okay.
That's it. Yeah.
So the Gen Zs are the ones
or 20
right after that.
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
So they're just now hitting 2022 area, something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So these are younger folks. So with Gen Z, women are no longer more religious than men. For decades, we've thought of women as more religious than men. Survey results, conventional wisdom, and anecdotal glimpses across our own congregations have shown us how women care more about their faith, though researchers haven't been able to fully untangle the underlying causes for the gender gap across religious traditions and across the globe. Now, recent data shows the long-held trend may finally be flipping. In the United States, young women are less likely to identify with religion than young men. All right, so first I wanted to ask you guys have been pastors for more than a year or two. Does the idea that women were or are more religious than men, how does that line up with your experience in church ministry?
I was going to say one of my experiences in Wisconsin when I was serving as a pastor up there was like Northwest Wisconsin, and there was one Sunday where it was almost exclusively women, and the first time it happened, I was shocked. I mean, it's just I walk in and there's women, but where are the men? Well, in Wisconsin, from the Saturday before Thanksgiving to the Sunday after Thanksgiving is their hunting season.
Yeah.
Just, like 9 days. Mm-hmm. And so those 2 Sundays of hunting season, the men are gone. And there are some women who go hunting as well, but, it's predominantly men. And on top of that, I'm going, if you're the pastor who doesn't hunt, you have no idea what's going on until somebody clues you in. And so I have seen that happen, but also along the same lines is, yes, there, in my experience, no matter where I've been, there have been generally more women than men in church, in Bible studies, in leadership roles. Well, I would say not so much. It's interesting that probably is fairly balanced out.
I think I had a similar situation to you in Western Nebraska, except it wasn't hunting season; it was calving season. Whenever the cattle ranchers would start calving, all the new baby cows being born, I had 0 men, 0 boys, and half the girls were gone too, because they were all out in the fields making sure the calves were born. They were, not breech and all of that. And so all of a sudden springtime, the attendance like dropped in half, and it was mostly women and small girls that were in church. I had very, very few others that were there. And I thought, man, this is really weird. And I found out it was calving season. Well, okay, so that makes sense. And they said, just don't count on the men folk for the next, 6, 8, 10 weeks or so, depending on how long it takes to get them all in.
Yeah.
Okay. So, it makes you rethink how you do church and all. But I think, we were talking a little bit before we started today, and this is why Tom was all excited about us, stopping that and getting into the recording of it. But I've had Bible studies that I've taught for years, and the vast majority of my Bible studies have always had more women than men. And that's kind of just been a trend for years, that women have more time to spend studying scripture. Now, when you start putting in demographics in that, no, I haven't had a Gen Z. I haven't had a millennial. I think I've only had 1 or 2 millennials over the last several years in a Bible study, male or female. And that's just kind of rare for our churches. But most of our churches we're not reaching millennials and Gen Z, like we used to, or like we ought to. And so, yeah, this has been a really kind of a strange thing. I question, and I don't question, I'm not doubting or challenging. I'm just trying to figure out, how do you define more religious in the article?
So I think it goes a lot to church attendance, worship attendance. That's almost kind of like the basic thing that people measure. And of course, that's one of the things that's kind of related to this in a different way. As your ministry kind of changes, you have to your metrics have to change as well, right? Because if you're just measuring the old metrics, whether you're sort of kind of you're assuming everything is the way it used to be before, you have to learn how to do new metrics. So anyway, I think it's church attendance. In my experience, I would say, for the most part, there have always been more women involved, more women on Sunday morning, more women in Bible studies, more women participating in some of the the ministry activities. Not to say there weren't men there, not to say there weren't always sometimes a good number of men, but it always seemed like I remember hearing a sermon one time from a preacher who said something to the effect that when people criticize women being in ministry, he said, let me tell you something, if it weren't for the women, we wouldn't have ministry in most places, because the guys are off doing whatever they're doing. So, okay, but this suggests that something has changed, is changing, that with the Gen Z, the younger generation, that number is shrinking, that number that women have held, a percentage number that women have held over men, that they're more involved in church or ministry or religion, is shrinking, and that we're at about the same levels. Why do you think that might be? What do you think's happening there?
And I read the article, and then I texted both of you saying the link where making church more masculine. and I don't know, I'm sure there's a trend somewhere out there where that's definitely happening, but I know that there were a number of books, 2 or 3 books that came out about um, just tapping into the masculine side of humanity. I mean, the things that we tend to talk about, images like winning and losing, and the warrior mentality, and all of that, and because we want to get the men back in church, and we're just saying in this article, historically, women were the ones who initially were attracted to Christianity. And you see that when you read the book of Acts, how or even the Gospels, who supported all those dozen men who followed Jesus and Jesus' ministry, and it tells you who supports them. They were all women, and they were. Yeah, and they tended to be women of some influence. And the same thing in Acts is where does Paul go? And he goes where people gathered, but as it turns out, it's where women gathered, and connects with the community there. And he's taken in by a woman who has both influence and wealth. We just go through the list of things we don't really see, because we've got in our mind that faith was primarily to everyone, and it was, but who responded? It was the women, and continued to be up until recently. And what they say, one of the things that changed was women, like men, began to prioritize their job, and no longer was it about being home and taking care of the kids and making sure the family went to church. That's one of the things that's changed since all of us, since we were born. That has been a huge shift, so that at this point, and it ties into a recent message I heard about being more focused on the accumulation of wealth and this life than on the things of God. And that's what has happened within the Western culture, not necessarily around the world, but it has certainly happened in the United States and Western Europe.
One of the hints in the article, it didn't really unpack it too much, but it talked about the idea about making church manlier, and it dropped a few names: Mark Driscoll, Owen Strachan, and Jordan Peterson. Whom those three, probably the most well known as far as in the church circles might be Mark Driscoll, right, a pastor that I forget the name of the church, Mars Hill.
Yeah.
And just sort of how a lot of people call that toxic masculinity, right? And bringing that in the church and kind of surrounding that idea with notions of faith and Christianity, and how you're exactly right, Tom. Education has changed for a lot of women over the last several decades, where they've been able to have higher forms of education, which leads to better jobs, and maybe they have more. More women have more opportunities to do other things now. But that also, as a response to some of the things that we've seen the church sort of endorse and embrace in a lot of parts of the church, that women are saying, if that's what we're going to let church be, then I'm not going to be a part of that, right? If we're going to let leaders continually get away with abuse, if we're going to let, and by and large, male leaders, if we're going to let men who are leaders in the church get away with abuse and get away with harassment, then I don't want to be there. And that sort of kind of leads to other other things, right?
Yeah.
Which is hard, that's part we need to wrestle with, right? Like
Mhm.
how much of it is just kind of how much of it is it a response to what the church hasn't been? Yeah, what the church hasn't.
I think another issue that we're looking at here is the, you mentioned higher education. Women were more exposed to higher education and more and participating more in higher education. If you look at the demographics of higher education and the shift of what has happened in our country, you begin to see much more challenge to any kind of organized religion in higher education, period, whether it's liberal or conservative, traditionalist or radical, whatever. All religion has been under the gun in higher education for the last century, even more so and this from German liberal Protestantism from the 1800s. But when you start seeing more and more people coming through our educational system where that seems to be pushed, challenging anything that has anything to do with any kind of religious values or religion or religious values, you're going to see a shift in the general participation and population of folks who are quote unquote more religious or less religious. And that's just a trend that follows the culture. Culture has become less religious over the last 50 years, 75 years, 100 years.
Yeah.
So, well, one of the questions I guess that raises, at least initially, because what we're saying is when people are better educated, they're less religious.
I'm not sure if it's better educated. I think it's more educated.
Yeah, well, and I want to.
I mean that sincerely. I think part of where you go and what you're studying and under whom your tutelage, is going to influence how you begin to process everything.
Yeah, well, and I want to come back and kind of, because I know we're not saying that. None of us believe that if you're well educated,
right,
that you've stepped off the deep end, because first of all, we've all gone through the process of ordination, and as United Methodists, we do have a high respect for the educational process.
Absolutely.
I continue to want to know more and learn more. But one of the things that for me is I have come to a point where my faith is a reasoned out faith. It's not just I heard somebody say it and I like that person, and so I follow that. And I think one of the things that I want to just highlight here is, at least I believe this to be true for all of us, is we're not afraid of questioning and pushing against the precepts that we have as followers of Jesus Christ, and we're not afraid of quantum science or fossil fuels. I mean, you can just throw out all this stuff that sometimes becomes kind of.
But I think
I make it an enemy.
Yeah.
I agree with you. I think though, I think one of the questions that I raise though is when higher education tends to begin to choose or to lean toward one discipline over another, as if to say, this is the true discipline, this is not. This becomes mythology. This becomes, whatever. That there is only one source, one path to find truth. And we've seen that because a lot of our most esteemed universities have lost their way from their original concept of why they were founded. All of our Ivy League schools were founded upon or by religious groups. Almost all of them. But the idea of going to Harvard or Princeton or Yale, and I haven't been there recently. And to be honest with you, I'm only going on this from what I understand is happening in the theological circles, is that theological, philosophical, all of those tend to be downplayed a little bit more than the sciences and even the social sciences and stuff. So and that's a generalization, but at the same time, it's very difficult to find even divinity schools that are that are promoting the kinds of faith and faith traditions that I think Christianity Today's article is trying to present. How do you become more religious or less religious? What's changed in our society? Is it the toxic masculinity? Is it culture? Is it the abuses of power within the church? Is it, I think there's a lot of variables in there that just mixes it up into one big, huge stew that's hard to separate out. What's the root cause of all of this? And I think the church has its work cut out for it in trying to figure all this out. Tom, you pointed out the masculinity thing, and I wanted to go back to that for a minute because this is what we were talking about, especially. I listened to a fellow pastor, Jim Osier, up in North Texas. He was talking about his congregation trying to reach a specific targeted demographic of young men, age, I don't know, 19 or 20 or so, up to about age 35 or so. And they went overboard. I mean, they did everything they could do to target that audience of people. And the folks that they reached, I mean, the way they did that is they went to Texas Motor Speedway over in Fort Worth and hired a stock car team to come and bring a stock car and put it in front of their church. Their church is on a main road. And so there's a lot of traffic going by there. And they were targeting young men, specifically men who like stock car racing, and brought in a whole lot of young families. And that was one of the things they weren't prepared for. They were trying to reach young men. What they didn't realize is the young men were going to bring their whole families, all their little children, their spouses, and so on and so forth. And that was something that caught them all off guard, and they weren't ready for that. So how does that play out here? I mean, I thought about that too, and I was going, man, this is great. We ought to do this. And when I lived up at Canyon Lake, I was talking about getting me somebody with a brand new shiny bass boat or fishing boat and putting it in front of the church and say, let's talk about being fishers of men and bringing in men folk. And and the gimmicks are great. The gimmicks are fun, but there's still something missing in all of that too that needs to be addressed. And it's not just the fact that men, when they do get excited about something, they bring their whole families with them. It's what will keep them in the faith long after fishing season's over, long after racing season's over, long after whatever it is that the gimmick is. How do we keep people involved and interested in the faith, but not just interested, committed, transformed by it? And
so that's my deal.
Yeah.
Because, and I know it's different, but I'm looking at the early church, and the culture surrounding the early church didn't support them, right? The culture wasn't telling them, oh, you're Christian, that's great, we welcome that. They were arguing against them, right? I mean, that's where we get apologetics from, right? Where the church is learning how to defend what it believes against the larger culture. So I don't think the church needs the culture to be who God's called it to be, right? Mm-hmm. And so, and to your point, right, Brad, about that question. So, what are the deeper ways that we need to be preparing our people to live as people of God in the culture? That's right. I keep it's covered up right now because I have a very professional setup here. It's an old computer box and a strong, exhaustive concordance of the Bible as my laptop stand. But right under it, there is a note card that I wrote. I keep it here as just a great reminder. I think what's his name? Lynn Sweet wrote it.
Yeah.
The early Wesleyans were more concerned about how to send people out rather than how to seduce them in.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. And so, those gimmicks you talk about, I feel like we've been doing gimmicks for a long time.
Yeah.
And
they're gimmicks.
They're gimmicks, and they've run their course a long time ago. The problem is our churches, we've sort of relied on those. Mm-hmm. And and now we're empty.
Yeah.
and now, so that's why we're scared to send our kids to college, because that's where they're going to lose their faith. That the university is going to take their faith away. Well,
No.
what did we give them
To defend their faith,
to
right.
prepare them to live as Christians, to be able to hear those questions, to
Right.
be able to respond to questions, to be able to struggle with questions themselves?
Yeah.
I don't.
Now we're 2-3 generations down the road.
Right.
from doing that. Yeah.
And I think we have gotten what we are reaping what we sowed. We're sowing what we reaped.
Mhm.
Repted. I don't know.
Yeah. Harvest.
Harvested.
Harvest is lean. It's not a very full harvest,
Right.
You know?
Right. And so, I was surprised when you said that church, they were surprised that the men came to church and they brought their families. Because as you read in men's ministries, I have,
Yeah.
that's one of the things you always hear, that you want to reach the men, because if the men come, they bring
They're
their
the hook.
families.
They bring the family. That's right.
Yeah.
The family follows. And that's true to the most part. It's not
Right.
true finally
Right.
all the way
Sure.
across. But
Yeah.
when you do reach a certain target, you got to be very, very aware of that target and know what are the ramifications of reaching that target successfully.
Yeah. And so some of that is, and this is where I struggle, because some of that sounds like marketing to me, right? We've got a target audience, right? Our women now, even our women aren't coming to church, our young women. So let's target young women.
Right.
And I think that's helpful to an extent, to at least kind of shape how we might do some things. But also, so we've got to figure out, this is how I want us to end, just kind of talk through some of this. All right, let's say this is changing, that women are no longer as religious as they used to be compared to the number of men. That's going to bring a change to church ministry as well.
Yes, it is.
Right. So
I think it's young women here that the article is really targeting, isn't it?
Well, because
it's just saying this is the trend. This is
the
the
new trend for younger women coming through,
Right.
is that they are not as committed to the church as they used to be.
Right. Do we assume that if they get a
Generation.
certain age that maybe they'll change that? Well, we can assume that, but I just don't think that's a great thing to assume. So how do we then, as a church, how do we thoughtfully engage in that kind of ministry? And this is where, the target, that's helpful, but also this is still, to me, this is still a discipleship question. How does the church teach discipleship to people who are here, and how does the church communicate that sense of discipleship to new people who may come?
Yeah.
One of the things comes back to, the reason I am a Christian is I encountered Jesus Christ. I mean, in a better way to put it is, he came to me in a way that I recognize something's different. And the gospel is, and what I love about reading the gospels and reading what Jesus is doing is he is focused on the kingdom of God, not the kingdom of the U.S., not the conservative group or the liberal agenda or what's the latest news and trend and the weather report. And I mean, go all through that. Is I think
or his ministry.
He was so focused on his relationship with the Father that those who were closest to him started asking him, and John, you did a good job of this last week when saying, okay, we just watched you pray.
Teach us.
Now teach us to pray. We want to do what you're doing. And I think where we have gotten way off course is we've said, look, we think that life is good and it's just better with Jesus. I mean, no, life with Jesus is not better. It's different. It is absolutely different. We've forgotten to show people, demonstrate that there is this this difference of being in love with the Lord Jesus Christ and having him as not as a God Christ, not just I know best friend and all that, companion. He's more than that. He's the one who challenges me when I am thinking some things that the culture thinks is okay. Yeah. He's the one who's challenging me when I am making decisions that really are getting me into the weeds rather than into the harvest. I mean, you just go through all of that list. And that's why I think one of the things we can do within the church is again, turn our eyes on Jesus, as that one song says, and recognize we need to get on his agenda rather than inviting God to put a stamp of approval on our agenda.
I think the thing that I read this past week, just a couple of days ago, I think was from J.D. Walt, who's out of Seedbed. And he was talking about the difference between reformed and transformed. Reformed is repairing what is broken. Transformed is changing from the inside out.
Right on.
That's a real rough translation or interpretation of what he said, but it's a powerful illustration of the fact that what we're missing in the church is we keep trying to fix what's broken instead of letting Christ transform us from the inside out. And when the laity get that, they will take that into the world and people will recognize it and say,
when the preacher gets that.
Well, when the preacher gets it too, but you got to keep pushing that.
Yeah. Here, Brad, take my offering for that, man. Here's my art. Here it is.
We take PayPal. We take no. I mean, really, I think until your heart is transformed, you ain't gonna understand it. It's just another social group for you.
And I'll finish with this because to affirm and agree exactly that, unless the church allows itself to be transformed,
amen,
we're just going to keep going and seeing what we've been seeing. So anyway, actually, you know what, I'll leave with this. I picked up a book called I think it's Revival, and Adam Hamilton wrote it. Okay, and I was just going through it, and I had never thought of it this way, but he made a comment in there because part of it is going over Methodist history. And from Oxford on, and so he made the comment that the Methodist movement began as a college ministry. Now,
campus ministry, right?
Yeah. So, and of course, you know that because they're on. Yeah, we all know that story. I just never kind of put it, and never kind of connected the two like that. That's a great thing to think about because it came up in our conversations. As more people find themselves on campus life. Right. How much do we need to invest in that ministry? That's who we are. That's even where we come from. So anyway, all right. All that to say is, men, women, Jesus loves you and transforms life, and it's good on this side of the transformation. Right?
I'm telling you,
it never stops. So anyway, if there's any questions you want to talk about that a little more, let us know, and we'd love to be able to get into that some more. That's that gets me going, man. That's what I'm talking about. So. Yep. Tom, Brad, thank you for the gift of your time. Always good to see and hear from you fellas. Hope it's been a good talk for you. If you've listened or watched, thanks. We appreciate it. All of the donations everybody sends that contributes to our lavish lifestyles. If you were to rob us all right here, right now, live, you'd probably make off with about
I think I got $1.17 in my pocket.
I've always got a $20 bill emergency fund. So
tucked away somewhere, right? Yeah.
Somewhere. All right. And no at-home nose procedures.
Oh my gosh, please don't do that. Yeah.
Thank you all for your time. Have a great rest of the week and God be with you.
God bless. Bye-bye, y'all.
Adios, amigos.